Hello and welcome to the show. I'm George Eliason. Now, the other day, The Guardian came out with an article that, honestly, it almost turned a hair on my head in a good way. Now, finally, mainstream media is admitting that a coup, one, might have happened in Ukraine, but two, most importantly, that the beginning of this particular side of the war in February 22 was not a Russian invasion. Now, they don't say that openly, but they lead right up to that fact. And all you need to do is step through the door. Now, I'm going to read a little bit from this article, and it's quite frankly mind-blowing, because what you see written in the Guardian article is the simple fact that Vladimir Putin had no real choice of whether or not his troops were going to cross the border. Now, the article is called War in Ukraine Has Changed Europe Forever, and no event has transformed the continent more profoundly since the end of the Cold War, and there's no going back now. Finland is the case in point. Its fears of Russia run deep, and from 1809, for more than a century, it was part of the Russian Empire. It was part of Russia, albeit an autonomous duchy. Now, what does that mean? Well, it had full autonomy. It ruled itself. In World War II, it lost 12% of its territory to Moscow. Well, the Russian Empire was long since gone by then, and it became part of the Soviet Union. So it didn't lose anything. It was already part of something. It was part of for over 100 years. Every family, and this is important, every family has war memories, and history tells us of the danger, says Emilia Kulas, the director of the Finnish Business and Policy Forum. Yet we were hesitant. We thought being neutral served Finland best. Every family has memories. What do you think is going on in Donbas, in Ukraine, where the bulk of that war was fought, where the most people died? Why didn't they count? And they get into the fact that they never counted. In 2014, it appears to have been Chancellor Angela Merkel's warnings of massive damage to Russia and German relations that persuaded Putin to call a halt to the advance of the Russian-backed separatists in the Donbas. Now, this was happening in a city called Debaltseve. Ukraine was being massacred, the army, and there was talk of moving west. Now, these are coal miners, computer programmers, doctors, lawyers, construction workers, shop clerks. It wasn't a regular army. Why were they able to do this against the standing army and these groups of nationalists like Right Sector and Azov Battalion so handily? Well, it wasn't because the Russian army was there. They were sending trainers, yes, but it was because the best and the brightest in Ukraine, the people that volunteered for service and made their careers in the military, for the most part, were from Donbas and Crimea. These two regions of the country were where the most altruistic people were that believed in the Ukraine. If you can believe this, it's just the reality. You look at the military today, people going into the military go in there because they want to serve their country. They want to say thank you. They're patriotic in the sense that they really believe that their country is a force of good. And being 17, 18, 19-year-olds, this is the first way they learn how to do it. And for them, it's hard, and it's the best way that they can be thankful for living in that country. And this is worldwide. And, quite frankly, I don't care if you're anti-war or not. The fact that these young people are so altruistic in what they're doing can't be denied. And the same thing for Ukraine. That one fact backfired on Ukraine's military action in Donbas in 2014. You see, Western Ukraine didn't volunteer for the military. They were going to nationalist camps with people guessing at what to do, who thought that because they had nationalist political thought, well, that would win the day over people that understood a little bit about strategy and tactics and moving. Now, obviously, it didn't work out that way. So when Devaltseva was getting ready to close up, they were already talking about moving west and possibly taking Kiev and resetting the government to pre-2014. Now, that would have been a good move for everybody at that point. But this was the first time Russia stepped in, and they stopped them. And the next thing that happened was it was Merkel who proposed the Minsk agreements. In return, Germany refused to arm Ukraine. With France, they brokered the Minsk II agreement, whereby Donbas would return to Ukraine as an autonomous territory. Now, that is the facts of Minsk II. Donbas was more than willing to rejoin Ukraine. Hello? All Ukraine had to do was sit and talk and negotiate with it. Here's the problem. Ukraine refused to speak with the leaders in Donbas. Now, if you're brokering a political agreement, you need leaders on both sides. And they refused to recognize these people the entire time. Now, that was a big warning for the people here, obviously. But all Kiev actually needed to do was take a few small steps. Donbas would be back in the Ukraine, and they didn't want that because Donbas elected Viktor Yanukovych. And they knew in the next election, things could go back to pre-2014 that way too. And they weren't going to stand for it, so they needed the military engagement. Putin, on the other hand, forced the leaders in Donbas to take every step they agreed to in the Minsk agreements, no matter what the cost was. Russia's thought on this at the time seems to be, well, if you don't do it, we look foolish. If you don't do it and Ukraine balks, okay, and doesn't fulfill their end, they have grounds, to say what they want against you. So even though it cost lives in Donbas, they still did it anyway. They had no choice if they wanted Russian support. Now in 2016, Russians' hopes, this is the article, by the way, Russians' hopes of a split between Western Europe and the United States were revived by the election of Donald Trump, not because of any specific policy, rather because of the strong hostility he provoked in Europe. Think about that. Is that the Russian collusion? You dashed their hopes because there was no Hillary Clinton? There's your evidence of it. You hurt Europe's feelings. Shame on you, MAGA. Shame on you. Biden's election, on the other hand, brought the U.S. administration and Western European establishments back together again. Now, it's no wonder about that. They're on the same page, making a green global mess that's unsustainable. That's going to cost everybody everything. But that's what they're doing, so that's okay. All these years also saw Ukraine refuse to guarantee autonomy for the Donbas and Western failure to put any pressure on Kiev to do so. This is extraordinary for an article in Western media, never mind The Guardian. Now, here's the end of it. In recent months, the German and French leaders in 2015, Merkel and Holland have declared that the Minsk II agreements on Donbas autonomy were only a maneuver on their part to allow the Ukrainians time to build a military that could actually attack. This is what Russian hardliners always believed, and by 2022, Putin himself seems to have come to the same conclusions. This is assuming that Putin's an idiot. He tried to do everything he can to keep Donbas in Ukraine. All these years, they never recognized LNR, Lugansk People's Republic, or DNR, Donetsk People's Republic, because of this. As guarantors of the agreement, if Kiev did make moves, they were guaranteeing that Donbas would once again be a part of Ukraine. The last part of that section of the article is the beach. Nonetheless, almost until the eve of the invasion, Putin continued unsuccessfully to press the French president Emmanuel Macron, in particular, to support a treaty of neutrality for Ukraine and negotiate directly with the separatist leaders in Donbas. What does that mean? Minsk. Uphold the Minsk agreement. Let's go forward with this. But Ukraine was already prepped for the attack. And we've talked about this in different forums over and over and over again. Imagine half of Ukraine's army, at the time, over 170,000 troops, had been told that these so-called Russian separatists in Donbas were Russian invaders now legally, and they could all be killed and should be killed. Hundreds of thousands of people would have died if Vladimir Putin did not send his troops. And to show you how offhand that was, how unprepared Russia was, you don't attack a country when the numbers are working 1-7 against you. But that's what happened. It was a reaction to what was going on in Kiev and what Ukraine was doing within a week. And who would have reported that? A few months before that, a European leader told Ukraine, well, if your Croatian scenario happens quickly, within a few days, the victor writes the history. And that's the reality. This is what's going on in Ukraine right now. It was never any moves, any desire for peace. It was all about scaling up the conflict the entire time. It wasn't Russia. It wasn't Donbas. It was Joe Biden. This same Joe Biden that wants to send your children here, not for American values, no, not for Christian values, to support investment. $783 billion in private foreign investment going on in Ukraine as of right now. The investments are worth more than the country. In real terms, what this means is Volodymyr Zelensky has sold his country. It is state captured. You might as well put logos on it now. And people need to come over here and fight and die for this. Fight against people that are fighting for your values. That's something that you haven't considered. The people in Donbas, Crimea, Russia, are the ones that hold your values. God, country, patriotism, freedom of speech, freedom of determination. That's all been shut off in Ukraine. I'm George Eliason, and I'll see you on the next show.